really realistic, which now I'm afraid people might actually think that the sky Roomba is real.
Hopefully not.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Hi, Steve.
How are you?
Hello.
Good.
Hello. Mr.
Happy
Noel, how are you? How's the technology tonight? Okay, thank you.
Hi, Council President Lube.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. I think the mute button's being sticky tonight.
I'll give you extra. I'll give you extra time, Councilor Shaw.
Thank you. I'm not sure why.
All right, thank you. I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Krager, please call roll.
Councillor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councillor Newton,
Here.
Council President Lube,
Here.
Councillor Shaw,
Here.
Mayor Snyder,
Here.
Youth Councillor Nog.
Here.
All right, Mr. Nullip, would you mind putting a flag up on the screen? I'd ask everyone to mute and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance on their own. All right. Thank you, Mr. Nullip. Staff or council, any non-agenda items?
Nothing from us, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I want to introduce a proclamation to support the Ukrainian community. I wish we'd had a council meeting a week or week plus ago where we could have considered this a little more timely, but multiple cities in Washington County, and I think the mayors all collectively felt this was important for our cities to act on. And so I'm asking the council to approve this proclamation this evening. I hope that there's support among the council. If there's questions or concerns, we can certainly discuss them. Councillor Shaw?
I was just going to move. I think it's vital and important.
All right, so you are moving approval of the proclamation?
Looks like Heidi has a comment though. Council President. Nope.
I think she's going to second. Council President Lube, second. Okay. All right, any further discussion? City Recorder, please conduct a roll call vote, starting with Youth Councillor Nog for an advisory vote.
Youth Councillor Nog,
Yes.
Councillor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councillor Newton,
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for introducing this. It's really important.
Council President Lube,
Yes.
Counselor Shaw,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder.
Yes. Okay, the motion's adopted unanimously, and thank you to the entire council for the support on that. And I think our community, and particularly Ukrainian members of our community, will feel supported and recognized in the way that they should and deserve to be. Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Anyone that wishes to make public comment may call in to the following phone number, 503-966-4101. And those with general comments should call in now to get in the queue. Again, that's 503-966-4101. And we'll move on to follow up to previous public comment. Assistant City Manager Nyland, follow up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. We did not receive any written public comment at our February 22nd council meeting. And as far as our fun fact, it's important. Today, March 8th, is International Women's Day, a day devoted to celebrating the achievements of many women and seeking gender equality. International Women's Day grew out of a labor movement. The seeds were planted in 1908 when 15,000 women marched demanding shorter working hours, better pay, and the right to vote. The first official International Women's Day celebration occurred in 1911. So the theme for this year's celebration is Break the Bias, and we urge people to call out gender stereotyping and discrimination when they see it. So we have these types of occasions, these days, because we imagine and work towards creating a world that is equal, a place that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a place where everyone is valued and feels a sense of belonging. So here's to women. You are seen, you are heard, you are valued, and you are appreciated today and every day. So thank you for all that you do. That is my report for tonight.
What a great way to end your report, and thank you. That is spectacular. Councilor Goodhouse?
Yes, sorry, I was looking at the agenda and I missed for the non-agenda items. I'd like to have a non-agenda item at the end of the night.
Okay, what is the topic?
A follow-up on the stat. I spoke briefly with City Manager Reimer earlier today, and I wanted to follow up on the status of from 2 weeks ago on the approval for the CARES money. I couldn't find that online or on social media to share with businesses, so I wanted to see where that was at so I can share that with the community.
Okay, City Manager Reimer, maybe you can add that to your administrative report. That might be a more appropriate place for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. We are going to move on to Tigard High School Student Envoy report out. Elise Butera, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi. Sorry, I'm taking this from my car. So Tigard has a lot of stuff going on right now. I want to first start off talking about prom. Very excited. We are having a prom happening April 30th. Our junior class within leadership is working super hard to make sure that it's obviously following all the COVID protocols, but since a lot of things are lifting, especially with the mask mandate, we're kind of figuring that all out. Also, our activities committee is working on getting open mics, which is something we did pre-COVID, but have had trouble kind of getting it started up, going again, which is kind of like a night focus on our performing arts community, where they kind of, it's exactly how it says, an open mic. They get to go to the mic and share whatever they want to, obviously school appropriate. And then what I'm personally most excited about is that we're bringing back our Voices Assembly, which is a student-centered assembly where our peers get to share out stories that range from mental health to immigration, and they all have something to do with perseverance and acceptance. And yeah, that's pretty much what's going on at Tigard High School right now. Lots of busy stuff. Voices is the biggest thing that I'm working on, along with the ASB HR, which is Human Resources.
Well, thank you. That is very exciting. It's exciting to hear prom is on. I really like how you describe the Voices Assembly and what the objectives are there. That's frankly something our whole community the city could probably learn from. So we may ask for some details on that. I think some adults could benefit from similar discussions.
Yes, I'll keep you guys updated on how voices go. Thank you.
Thank you. And have a good evening. Thanks for joining in your car. We appreciate that. Let's see. Yep. Next item on the agenda is an update from Police Chief Mcalpine, January 2022 Strategic Dashboard Report. I think it might actually be February, perhaps.
That is correct, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Chief Kathy Mcalpine for the February dashboard. And Mike, if you go ahead and put that up. First thing I'm going to point out is the obvious. I think we're an entire red, with the exception of one green only because it was neutral, not that it was decreased. And that is quite concerning. Our trend is going upward for 2022, both in person crimes and property crimes, with a significant increase in that property crime. We are not the only jurisdiction that's facing this, but we are challenged in trying to hold people accountable. It's the same story. Our vehicle thefts, our catalytic converters continue to be high, and our burglaries in our storage units are also tracking high. Our thefts are mostly our shoplift. Our loss preventions are back working, and that has increased our workload and also their apprehension rate. So those are the things that are driving us. Kind of follow back from last month's report out. We talked a little bit about the recent law that passed on recycling these catalytic converters and maybe some proactive things that we could do. I did task the Sergeant Rivera with the commercial crime unit to look. We don't have any scrap metal in Tigard, but there's 3 in Tualatin and Beaverton. They made contact. They all stated that they are not taking in catalytic converters. There's no reason to not believe in their reporting. They believe it's being shipped across state lines, both in Washington and Idaho. Nonetheless, we're trying to be proactive. We've also reached out to maybe some auto repair dealerships to see if we can come up with some coordinated effort on those who might want to put the additional safeguard under their car for their catalytic converters. That's still very much a work in progress, but we have done some outreach on that. So hopefully have more back to you at a later date. Some other things I want to point out is our calls for service continue to grow as well. So again, we seem to go call to call. But when we do have breaks, our self-initiated is also increased by 18%. One thing to point out, though, is swing shift has always been predominantly our highest calls for service. And for the month of February, 93% of all of our shifts on swing shift was at minimums or required overtime to meet the minimums. So that, again, is quite concerning, and we can't wait till some more of our folks get through the academy and can get on their own and help us in the staffing numbers. With that, our staffing is we still have 3 vacancies. I have 2 interviews tomorrow on entry level. We have 1 in the academy, 1 that's slated to go to the academy this month, and 2 that we swear in on Monday, but will not get into the academy until August. So again, you're talking way down the road when they're officially receive all their training. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to just comment or acknowledge our tragic pedestrian auto fatality long haul. We are making progress. I think as you've been made aware in our updated news release that we do have a vehicle of interest that we're working on. So the CART team is working hard on that. We've been trying to reach out to the family, which is out of state, to provide our support. But this is definitely a difficult and trying time and very tragic for that family. And with that, I think I've pretty much caught you up to date. Expect also an update. This month was the Bikini Barista robbery. That was at the end of the month. Commercial Crimes Unit has worked very hard on that and expect to hear some progress on that very soon. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chief, I know that the dashboard looks really troubling with the red everywhere, and I immediately saw that when I reviewed it a couple days ago. Can you comment a little bit on, I mean, I know many communities are in the same sort of general situation, but I also have to think that some of the decisions our community has made in the last couple of years to make sure that we increased and supported staffing in a police department has at least allowed us to respond more effectively. But can you comment as to whether or not the rates of our crimes are similar to those in other local communities, or whether, I mean, are we faring a little bit better on a percentage basis, or is it literally just identical across the board?
To be very honest, I don't know how they're trending other than when we talked to the chief and sheriff of Washington County, and we're seeing similar trends, but not as many do the dashboard to get that month-to-month snapshot that I provide to all of you. So, but similar type of thefts, certainly the vehicle thefts, the catalytic converters, shoplift, those are all across. All of Washington County obviously is facing the same jail restrictions, although I did get a notice today saying that Washington County has a plan now to expand. They've got a 3-phase approach, and obviously depending on the COVID responses when certain things are lifted, but at least they do have a plan, so that was encouraging. I believe it starts probably in about 2 weeks. But they were cautious because, as they reminded us, that it's working with the entire criminal justice system. So they have a meeting with the presiding judge on how this is going to go. But at least the communication has opened up, and we could see. I looked at, we're making significant arrests, and the 126 I looked at for the month, I glanced at the first 50, and we were trending actually a little higher on booking them as opposed to releasing a citation. So I would say we're probably about 50-50 on that. So we are making some progress of being able to hold people accountable, and that is optimistic. The other part will be obviously the courts needing to get their backlog to actually hold people accountable through this process. And then the other thing is just, we've been without a outreach coordinator, and we probably need to start filling that position, because we need to continue to communicate with our community on just the proactive things that they can do. And Stephanie was fantastic at putting those things out and reaching out to our various communities, whether it's a block watch or some housing facilities. So that's something that we should probably get on sooner rather than later as well.
The mayors of Washington County will be very happy to hear that our feedback to the sheriff and the DA have perhaps had a little impact on thinking differently about lodging. So I'm glad to hear there's
really appreciate the support. It is helpful. And I know that the sheriff has done his part, and he's feeling the heat because, like I said, it just seems like there's quite a few people, and I would submit probably many are repeat offenders that are kind of preying on our community right now.
Councilor Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the report, Chief. I just want to say I appreciate your response when trends go up like the catalytic converter. I appreciate how you and your team, your command staff and the officers try to do what you can to, try to prevent those kinds of crimes, prevent those trends. And I think you're probably right. Communicating what we can with the public is helpful. I know that's helped in the past. I guess my question is there some support, additional support, or something that you need from the council as you're moving forward, trying to keep this, keep us all safe? Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. You expressed that last month, and I took that to heart, and that's why we did some of our outreach and proactive to see, we talked about joining the club, reaching out to our businesses to even see if we can sponsor. Quick research looked like it could cost about $300 to install those plates, maybe $150 if you have your own talents and you can do that. That may seem like a lot for fixed income until you get your stolen, and it could cost you, if you don't have insurance, several thousands of dollars. So it's almost can you pay me now or pay me later, or you roll that dice. And of course we don't want people to have to make those tough decisions. So but communicating out, finding out if there's any businesses that want to. We were thinking about trying to sponsor an event, hold a day. So Sergeant Rivera has that and is working towards finding possibly a way to work with some of our local businesses and then probably provide some sort of outreach to let everybody know what they can do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief. Appreciate the update, and please do keep us apprised of what additional or different support you may need.
I appreciate that, and just wanted to say thank you for the proclamation. After 35 years of public safety, obviously our hearts go out to Ukrainians both near and far. So really appreciate your leadership. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report out from the Tigard Area Chamber of Commerce. And we have Chamber Membership and Engagement Manager Love with us. Hello.
Hello, good evening, Council. So our leadership class met today and learned about education in STEM. They had a day packed full of hearing from the Tigard Walton School District, both staffing from Dr. Sue Ricky-Smith and then also from the school district board. And then they heard from PCC Makerspace. They got a tour of Creekside Community High School. And then they also got a panel discussion from local businesses on education and how education and the workforce mesh together. And so it was a great day. Next month is going to be a leadership toolkit day. So they have a lot of fun leadership building opportunities coming towards them for April. Big announcement made today. The Tigard Chamber Board of Directors announced this morning that Barbara Burkhart is going to be the next CEO of the Tigard Chamber of Commerce. That transition is going to be taking place on March 21st, and then Debbie's last day is going to be April 15th. So we have that transition coming up. And then our candidate endorsement committee has made their recommendations and has chosen to endorse for Metro Council President Elisa, I'm going to totally butcher her last name, Prishika, I'm so sorry. And then also Washington County Chair Beach Pace for those two seats. And so more information will be coming out on those candidates' endorsements process. And then we have our Tigard Restaurant Month that will be coming back this year in June. So we'll be announcing more information on that. And then the Tigard Shining Stars Community Awards is coming up on April 29th. The deadline to apply for a high school senior scholarship is this Thursday by 4 p.m. And then for nominations, it is by end of day on March 11th, which is this Friday. So we hope you can join us for the Tigard Shining Stars at Washington Square Embassy Suites on the 29th. And then we host AM Networking every Thursday at 7:30. Check our event calendar for more information on location. And then for the Tigard Farmers Market, we're rocking and rolling this upcoming season. We're planning to open May 1st. Vendor applications are open. We have a lot of returning vendors, and then we also have a lot of new, unique vendors coming to the market this season. We are excited to bring back our SNAP matching program, thanks to Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. And then we are also opening up our registration for our community booth and our music at the market tent as well. So we're excited to bring both of those programs back to the market this year. And then for the Tigard Downtown Alliance, your Downtown Tigard update, we have a new business that has recently opened up. They took over the old Cafe Allegro building, and it's Live Edge Eco Salon. And so we're excited to welcome them to the downtown core. And then Tigard Drinks for Good starts this coming Monday, March 14th, and will go until the 26th of March. And so money raised from that program is going to be going to Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. $2 of each drink sold of those specialty drinks will go to Tualatin, Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. And then Tigard Art Week is coming up on May 16th through 22nd. Applications are now open for artists. And then the Tigard Street Fair is going to be planned for September 10th. And that information will be coming out in April for vendor registration. That is all your updates for today. Any questions that I can answer for you?
Well, you answered mine. Thank you. I'm just curious about what Shining Stars was going to be in person, but Councillor Newton, go ahead.
Yeah, really quick, are the details for the, what are we calling it, Drink Week, or what, I forgot what you called it. Is that going to be on the website?
Yeah, so Tigard Drinks for Good is, the website is at exploredowntowntigard.com. It has just been updated with all the businesses. So it's Tigard Drinks for Good, and it will go on for about 2 weeks. And there's about 7 restaurants participating. Each of them have a St. Patrick's Day themed cocktail. So exploredowntowntigard.com is where you'll find that information.
Ooh, sounds intriguing.
Yes. Any other questions? Awesome. Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. Good to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. Have a wonderful evening.
All right. Let's move on to written public comment. City Recorder Krager, I believe we received 4 different written public comments by noon today at our deadline. One was from Emily requesting that we ban the sale and use of fireworks for the summer. That is going to be coming before some discussion about that is going to be coming before the council at my request well before the summer. So we're going to have time to be thoughtful and figure out how we may want to approach that this coming year. So just a heads up there. Then other written public comment, we received some significant detail about the nuisance issues and public health issues near Roger Potoff's residence and in that general area. We then got some feedback about the impacts of the Tigard made code changes and that Scott believes that they're too limiting. And then we also got public comment from Toby LaFrance about the city charter interpretation. And all 4 of those were distributed to the council prior to the meeting. I hope you've made yourself familiar with those. And we will ask Assistant City Manager Nyland to provide follow-up on those as appropriate at our next meeting. With that, we'll move to phone in public comment. Mr. Nolip, are there any callers in the queue?
Hello, Mr. Mayor, City Council. We have 4 callers in the queue. I will put the first one through now.
Thank you. Caller, please state your name for us for the city record, and we're here to hear what you have to share. Please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less if you're able to. First caller. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Mayor. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. I'm sorry about that, that momentary pause. My name is Roger Potoff, and I reside at 11710 Southwest Ann Street. And in supplement to the materials that I submitted to you in writing and the photographic and the photographs that attach to that, I wanted to just add this with respect to the photos. First, the photos which were available in the materials that I sent contained 15 photos, and certainly they were disturbing. There are photos of dead rats, trapped or found dead on my property or in the street proximate to my property at the neighboring property, 11650 Southwest Ann Street, which is one of the properties in focus with my nuisance complaints. And I just want you to note that these 15 photos do not provide a full or accurate accounting of the number of rats I have trapped or found dead on my property. I do not and have not deployed traps with any regularity. This is because the proper tending of rat traps, most notably the disposing of dead rats, is disgusting. And based on public health information published by Multnomah County for the city of Portland, there are serious health risks that go with trapping and handling rats. And I included the Multnomah City rodent brochure in the materials that I submitted. So I want to assure you, though, that clearing dead rats from traps is a mood-changing ordeal. And what does one do with a dead rat? Bury it in the garden or put it in a plastic bag or a box and then into the trash bin to rot while waiting for trash pickup day. And I want you to know that the smell of a decomposing rat in your trash bin is terrible, and it doesn't drift away on the breeze. The hotter the weather, the more the rats breed, and the more one can trap. And the more wretched the smell from the trash bin and or the more digging in the garden. So I just plead urgency with respect to these nuisance complaints that relate to the health and safety of residents in Tigard. If I have a minute left, I want to also address a question that may be on some people's mind. How is it that there is not a homeowners association that deals with these issues that come forward in my complaints? And I can tell you that there was a homeowners association. It was the Declaration of Restrictions, and it was dated December 1, 1959, and recorded March 23rd, 1960. However, that homeowners association, those restrictions were if you will, they were eliminated in 2015 by one of the offending parties, that is the party at 11650. There was no notice given of their effort to go and cherry pick residents with respect to the provision in the restrictions that provided that that a majority of the owners of the lots, if they were to sign a call to remove or not renew the restrictions, then the restrictions would not be renewed. And this was done at the last minute before those restrictions would have renewed automatically for another 10 years. I was not notified. Other neighbors in this neighborhood were not notified. And there are something like 18 homes that were included and covered by these restrictions. I feel that we were denied due process with respect to these important property rights. Of course, that's a legal matter that may or may not still be within reach under the statutes of limitation, but it certainly is unfair that this, and I didn't become aware of this until we went forward. And in fact, the Spragues didn't become aware of it until our attorney had told them that notwithstanding anything that the city of Tigard requires under its nuisance laws, that the homeowners association precluded livestock and poultry, that is, quoting, no animals, livestock, or poultry of any kind shall be raised, bred, or kept on any lot except that dogs, cats, and other household pets may be kept, provided that they are not kept, bred, or maintained for any commercial purpose. Also, no lot shall be used or maintained as a dumping ground for rubbish, trash, garbage, or other waste, shall not be kept except in sanitary containers, etc. So much of what we're dealing with today was otherwise covered by the homeowner association restrictions. And I ask that as the code is looked to for revision, that we include a provision that homeowner associations who are seeking to amend their requirements have to submit those requirements, those changes to the requirements, so that the city can become aware. Because obviously, in the situation that we're experiencing, when the homeowner association doesn't stick to it, these matters go by default back to the city at great expense and inconvenience. We have other things to do with with the limited resources of city government. And so I will leave it at that. I again thank you for your attention to this matter, and I look forward to the comments on the materials I submitted next week. Thanks again.
Mr. Potoff, thank you for your testimony, and I look forward to the follow-up next week as well. I would make sure that the staff are prepared in follow-up to public comment, that we do hear some robust follow-up on action plan on Mr. Potoff's written testimony and his oral testimony today. Mr. Nollup, please put through the next caller.
Hello?
Yeah, you're with the Tigard City Council. Please state your name for the record if you wouldn't mind, and then go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So my name is Mary Hatley Potoff, and I live at 11710 Southwest Ann Street in Tigard. Can
Go
you
ahead.
still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Okay.
you. Go ahead with your testimony.
Okay, so I hope you have read Roger's letter to council and viewed the photos of the conditions over the last 7 years. So Oregon has an urban growth boundary to mitigate urban sprawl and to preserve a rural lifestyle for those so inclined. That boundary has two sides to it. We and our neighbors live in a suburban residential neighborhood in Tigard. We should not have to live next to a barnyard on one side, and quite frankly, I have no idea what is going on the other side, other than abject, woeful neglect, clearly in violation of the Tigard Municipal Code. The existing code in Tigard specifically prohibits conditions that attract insects and rodents. The city of Tigard doesn't it have to enforce the existing code? Because really, this is a public health and safety issue. If, that's capitalized, if the code is to be amended, how about limiting the number of chickens, goats, ducks, let's just call it livestock, that a home zoned as residential can have before it's considered a farm, non-compliant with residential current zoning? Is the first step, though, to enforce the existing code? Just a question, but I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Potoff. Appreciate that testimony, and we will follow up as we described after Roger's testimony. Mr. Nollup, please put the next caller through.
Hello, my name is Shelley Pennington, and I live at 16653 Southwest 88th Place. I became aware of a survey that had gone out to the community regarding the term limits. After confirming my name, I would not be on the city's website. I completed the survey and was very candid. Obviously, the council is leaning towards voting to change the definition of consecutive to meet their various personal needs. It goes against the community's previous vote against the mayor's previous vote, and also shows the city's outrage at this idea is not being considered. It appears that this council is acting in their own best interest and not in the best interest of the community. If your names appear on the ballot, you can be assured I will be campaigning against you and your anti-democratic practices. Lastly, this reminds me of a recreation bill to join the Tualatin Hills Park and Rec through our property tax bill. That was voted down by Tigers residents, and consequently, we received a Parks and Recreation fee on their utility bill that was passed through the budget process, circumventing the vote of the people. And I think this is unethical. And now this term limit issue is being handled in the same manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Nola, will you put the next caller through, please?
Hello. Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Linda Nesveda. As you may know, I filed a gender discrimination complaint against several officers in the Tigard Police Department and requested an outside investigation. While I do not intend to discuss the specifics of my complaint, I do want to share a few concerns I have experienced with the department. One of my very first steps in addressing my complaint was to ask 3 different staff employees of the Tigard Police on how to file a formal complaint with the department. All 3 stated I need to speak with the sergeant in charge and contact him through non-emergency dispatch. At no point did any of these employees acknowledge a formal process or direct me to a form on their public website. After contacting the city attorney, I was referred to another sergeant within the department to handle an internal investigation into my complaint. I found him to be very professional, respectful, and well-intentioned. However, he quickly informed me that if I did a quick Google search of the police department website and the word complaint, it would have been the first thing that I would have seen. Unfortunately, I didn't do that until after I contacted the police department, but I would like to point out that it shouldn't be the job of a civilian to know the ins and outs of their website, but rather the job of the 3 public employees I spoke with to know their own formal complaint process. Frankly, if they needed to, those staff members could have just Googled it. Also, upon learning about the complaint from on the website from the sergeant, I informed him I would direct and encourage others to file their own complaints online. I was immediately told by the sergeant to not have them file on the website, but to have them directly contact him to avoid all the red tape. I can't presume to understand what red tape he was referring to, but once again, we have a well-meaning individual telling me not to follow the department's own complaint process. This is problematic because a process can be corrected and fixed if it is consistently followed. There are too many vulnerabilities and miscommunications when you depend on individuals instead of systems. People need to be able to depend on a process, not a person. In addition, after a great deal of reassurance from city staff and the city attorney that this internal investigation would be thorough and impartial, it took only 1 day for Police Chief Mcalpine to demonstrate the opposite. After obtaining emails from a public records request, Ms. Mcalpine inserted her biased, premature, and uninformed remarks to city leaders, while also acknowledged she was unaware of the specifics, was out of town due to vacation, and made these statements 1 day after I filed. Her comments to city leaders do not indicate to me that this investigation would even be close to a fair, impartial, and thorough investigation. Due to this, along with the email I sent you earlier, I ask that this council to reconsider your position on an outside investigation so my allegations can be thoroughly and objectively considered, and the findings of that investigation can then be properly and fully reported back to the council. Thank you for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate your testimony. All right, Mr. Nolliff, are there any other callers in the queue?
Mr. Mayor, at this time, no other callers in the queue.
All right, we're going to move on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is Committee for Community Engagement member appointments and Senior Management Analyst Hendricks, staff report.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nicole Hendricks, and I'm the Senior Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office here at Tigard. I'm also the Committee for Community Engagement Team Liaison. So I'm excited to be here tonight to ask for your consideration of a resolution appointing 7 new members and reappointing 1 current member to CCE. Committee for Community Engagement. CCE is a 15-member committee, and they represent various neighborhoods in Tigard. Their goal is to kind of inspire that two-way engagement, looking for broad participation of diverse community members, and kind of encourage a shared responsibility to improve our community. So I know we're kind of behind on the agenda, so for time's sake, I'll ask that you kind of reference the agenda item packet for information on how we promoted the CCE vacancies. But we did receive 12 applications, 10 of which were eligible, and received an interview with Councilor Newton, our CCE chair, and vice chair, and I. And applicants were geographically and ethnically diverse, with all except for our 1 reappointment who have never served on a Tigard committee before. So I'm really excited that there's some new voices. Tonight's recommended appointees bring unique perspectives to our engagement efforts and a passion for connecting with our Tigard community. I personally really enjoyed getting to know each of them. I'm very excited for them to join our team. And I believe all of these recommended appointees are here with us tonight, and pending their appointment, their city pins are ready to be sent in the mail. So thank you.
Well, that's excellent. I will ask them all, if they're present, to turn their cameras on briefly and wave. We are more than 20 minutes behind on the agenda, so we will be brief, and I'm not going to ask you all to speak, but I would love to at least see your faces in the times of COVID, and thank you very much for stepping up to serve your community. It is most appreciated. And Councilor Newton, did you want to share something or make a motion?
Just really quickly, I did want to say how excited I am. We have such a diverse group who brings such a wealth of backgrounds and enthusiasm for this. It was so, me and community engagement, that's my favorite thing. So I was just thrilled to see the group that we had interested in serving and their backgrounds. And so I'm really excited to see how engaged all of these folks are going to be. So, and I guess with that, I will move to approve resolution number 22-4.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? City Recorder, please read the number and title of the resolution.
Resolution number 22-04, a resolution reappointing Bhushan Gupta and appointing Alarazea Hadadi, Isaiah Jackman, Jiraj Singh, Heidi Dixon, Vejita Sharadi, Israel Jaquiz, and Isabella Romero to the Committee for Community Engagement.
And a roll call vote, please.
Youth Councilor Nog.
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse.
Yes.
Councilor Newton.
Yes.
Council President Lube.
Yes.
Councilor Shaw.
Yes.
Mayor Snyder.
Yes. Okay, resolution number 22-04 is adopted unanimously. Congratulations and thank you all. Have a good evening and thanks for joining us. And your pins are in the mail. Hopefully we can hand them to you in person soon. That day will come soon, I hope. All right, we'll move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is a joint presentation with the Planning Commission on Tigard Made. And Associate Planner Pollard, staff report, please. And then Economic Development Director Purdy will also present to answer questions.
Sorry, I froze for a second. I'm here. Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission and City Council and Mayor Snyder. My name is Hope Pollard, Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. I'm here with Economic Development Manager Lloyd Purdy and Assistant Director of Community Development Tom McGuire to talk to you about the Tigard Made project. So this is the third briefing that we've provided to you all on Tigard Made. Tonight, we are not looking for any formal decision, but we are requesting very specific policy direction on a number of specific questions that I will highlight in this presentation. So as a brief refresher, Tigard Made stands for Maintain, Advance, and Diversify Employment. It looks at how we can use land use to improve the capacity of Tigard's employment lands with a focus on job density, social equity, and environmental sustainability and walkability. Again, as a refresher, these are the areas that are covered by the MADE project. So it's all of our commercial and industrial lands that are covered in red here. All the commercial, industrial, and mixed use lands that are not covered by plan districts like the Triangle, Downtown, or Washington Square. Those three plan districts are covered by other projects. Part of the reason this project started is because we are short on employment land supply. So as we highlighted in our last briefing, we recently completed an economic opportunities analysis. So as it's shown in red here and here, we're going to need between 600 to 1,000 acres of land to accommodate projected employment land employment growth over the next 20 years. However, as you can see circled in red on this page, we only have about 220 acres of vacant, partially vacant, or redevelopable land left. So it's time to make some decisions about how we're going to handle this shortage and find innovative solutions to accommodate job growth going forward. In the last briefing we held with the Planning Commission and City Council last year, we introduced staff's recommendation for how to accommodate this shortage, to treat it as an opportunity to really innovate with our land use code, building in strategic plan objectives and City Council goals in a way that encourages equity, job density, and walkability, among other things, and allows us to accommodate dense employment growth in the future without needing to expand our urban growth boundary. The Planning Commission and City Council directed us to move forward with these development code updates, including changes such as prioritizing equity through making space for manufacturing jobs with career pathways in our industrial sanctuary, prioritizing job density through making space for job dense industries, and prioritizing walkability by enhancing pedestrian friendliness, including limiting auto-heavy uses and large tenant spaces in certain areas. As a refresher, these are some of the strategic plan objectives that will be advanced with the development code updates as we are proposing them today, or as we're currently drafting them, I should say. So we'll be paving the way for a resilient local economy with a balanced, diverse mix of business sectors by allowing more business types to locate and mix in more locations overall, while advancing economic opportunity by limiting the types of businesses that can locate in our industrial sanctuary specifically in order to promote manufacturing jobs that allow for more economic mobility. We'll also be supporting walkability and connectivity through compact development form and mixed use development, especially in our mixed use employment zone. Since our last briefing, we've devised some draft code that relies on the creation of 4 new employment zones. So we introduced these 4 zones to you in our last briefing, but I'm just going to highlight them again real quick here because we've really built on them since the last time we talked. So what we're proposing first is the general commercial or CG zone, where a wide range of auto-centric commercial activity will be allowed, and a wide range of building sizes. This is a place where we really see as a place to accommodate auto-centric activity while still enhancing walkability and pedestrian friendliness overall. Next, we're proposing the mixed use employment zone, where we would allow the broadest range of low impact uses, and this zone is all about pedestrian friendliness. And finally, our industrial sanctuary. We're proposing that our light industrial and heavy industrials become just that, an industrial sanctuary. This is all about protecting manufacturing jobs. Research shows this is key to economic equity and mobility, with a higher density of career pathways and living wage jobs. So I'm not asking for input on these questions just yet. I just want to highlight these for you as our questions today. I'll come back to them at the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to highlight the main themes and the reasons why we're here to talk with you tonight. Is that we wanted to check in as our development code updates start to take shape and become more real. So we've taken really seriously our charge to prioritize equity, job density, and walkability, as I'll go over in more detail in just a minute. But as these changes take shape, we are seeing clearly that some existing businesses will be impacted. So we need your direction on how to proceed. I'll introduce the questions for you here, then get into some specific examples, and then I'll pose the questions to you again at the end of this presentation for us to really talk through together. So first of all, building equity into land use is a really tough task, but one important way we've been able to do this with the draft updates we're working on is through the creation of an industrial sanctuary, where we make space for manufacturing jobs. We've learned through our research that manufacturing as an industry typically provides jobs with low barriers to entry, career pathways, and living wages. While our industrial sanctuary would allow a wide range of manufacturing activity, it would now limit or prohibit non-manufacturing uses. So our first question for you tonight is, do you agree with this method of prioritizing equity, and should we move forward with it? Similarly, job density is tricky to capture with land use. There are many finicky ways that we could do this, including requiring reports of employment numbers for every business that locates here. But our draft code seeks to encourage density while not standing as an unnecessary barrier to business. With our draft code, we've created space for high density jobs, particularly in our industrial lands, by focusing once again on industries that have demonstrated that on average, they provide a greater density of living wage jobs. This means we've prohibited or placed square footage limits on some land-intensive, low job density uses in our industrial sanctuary and mixed use employment zone. So question number 2 is, do you agree with this method of prioritizing job density, and should we move forward with it? And this brings us to bullet point 3 here, walkability. By limiting auto-centric uses and large format retail in our mixed use employment zone, we're able to encourage walkability by creating a more pedestrian-friendly environment. So question number 3, do you agree with prioritizing walkability in this manner, and should we move forward with it? If the answer to all of the above questions is yes, we want to be very clear with the Commission and Council that this will result in creating some non-conforming situations for existing businesses, meaning businesses that are currently allowed under the current zoning will be prohibited with the new zoning. And we want to have an honest discussion with you all this evening to determine whether this is acceptable. So I'm going to briefly describe what a non-conforming circumstance really means here, and then I'll get into some details and then we'll come back to those questions. So I just wanted to briefly describe it to you first before we even get into examples, because I think that the term non-conforming sounds like a really scary label, but in reality, this is how it would really function. So what a non-conforming use really is, it would be considered prohibited under the new code. But even so, if a use that is allowed today, but would be prohibited under the new code, it would still be allowed to remain but not expand. And I'll get into some examples that will make this make a little bit more sense in a second. But the non-conforming use would still be allowed to remain, just not expand its building footprint or operations. Second, it can switch out with an identical non-conforming use as long as a building doesn't sit vacant longer than 6 months. So it can continue to operate there as long as it wants. It can even switch out with an identical use just as long as that building doesn't sit vacant longer than 6 months. Where it's a little bit more limiting is it cannot switch out with another prohibited or non-conforming use. And then finally, once a newly allowed use locates there, those non-conforming rights for that property are terminated. All right, so let's get into some examples by zone. I'm going to start with the really great news, which is that in the CG zone, the new general commercial zone, there are absolutely no non-conforming uses that will be created with the MADE project. Here, we're actually expanding the allowed uses and making residential even more feasible. And some of the newly allowed uses will be things like industrial and manufacturing, and also maybe some warehouse and distribution uses. In our mixed use employment zone, the main impacted uses that will become non-conforming are large format retail, drive-throughs, gas stations, and vehicle sales and repair. Think anything that would really be not that fun to walk around, anything that would impede pedestrian friendliness, because once again, this zone is all about pedestrian friendliness and job density. So smaller tenant spaces make for a friendlier walking environment. And the focus on density also helps with walkability, sustainability, and using our constrained employment land efficiently. And finally, in our industrial sanctuary, the main impacted uses that would become non-conforming are warehouse and distribution, off-site services, and outdoor and bulk sales. Again, this industrial sanctuary is all about economic equity and mobility, those manufacturing jobs. So the other industries that will be made non-conforming are those that typically have a lower density of on-site living wage jobs. So overall, these are the main uses that will be impacted with the MADE project that would become non-conforming in some part of the city. But I do want to highlight that none of these uses, there will be no use that will be prohibited citywide with this project. Every use here listed here will just either be moved around where it's allowed or will be restricted in size, but none will be outright prohibited citywide. So warehouse and distribution, for example, it's now newly allowed in the CG zone. So even though it's prohibited in the industrial sanctuary going forward. Off-site services will be limited in size so that local small business owners can continue to operate, while larger scale operations that require a lot of land will be made non-conforming. Commercial sales and services will by no means be prohibited citywide. They can continue to be as big as they want in the CG zone, but will be limited in size in the MUE zone, and will even be allowed in the industrial sanctuary in small accessory pockets. Drive-throughs and gas stations and vehicle sales and repair get in the way of pedestrian activity, so they'll be prohibited in the MUE zone, but allowed elsewhere. And finally, indoor entertainment, bulk sales, and outdoor sales. They currently take up a lot of space in our industrial land with low employment density. So we'll be limiting these uses similar to other commercial sales and services in the industrial sanctuary. And now we're back to our policy questions for this evening, the stars of the show. Staff recommends that given the constrained employment land supply that we're currently facing today, that we move forward with prioritizing equity, job density, and walkability in all of the ways that I just mentioned, even where they create non-conforming circumstances for some existing businesses, because essentially existing businesses are still protected. They're still allowed to continue their operations. But it does encourage redevelopment that is equitable, job dense, and walkable if and when those businesses choose to move in the future. So with that, that is staff's recommendation. I will give you a brief preview of project schedule, which is that we will be coming back to you in June, July of this year with the actual official code for recommendation for adoption, and then we'll be actually implementing that code in the second half of this year. But I'll linger on this slide for a little bit so we can have some discussion about these important policy questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to make sure our planning commissioners are on the line and have their cameras on and are ready to participate. And yes, thank you for keeping that slide up. I want to actually, if it's okay with the council, I'd like to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to ask questions first, if that's okay. Looks like folks are okay with that. So planning commissioners, who would like to provide either their input or questions first? And I've got K7. I don't know if that's your actual name. I doubt it, but
yes, that is my name. That's how
that
you
is your
pronounce my first name.
Okay. Go
Hi,
ahead, K7.
My name is K7. I'm one of the planning commissioners. Very nice to meet all of you council members. So I had a couple of clarifying questions, actually. One is kind of a hypothetical question. Hopefully it'll never happen, but I just asked, you know, for the non-conforming businesses, you know, hopefully we won't continue with the pandemic, etc. But if it does happen and they need to kind of move out into the sidewalk or something like that to create, you know, extensions to their business, is that also non-conforming and not allowed, or is that okay to do in those emergency situations?
So I'm want to make sure I understand the question. I know that currently businesses are allowed, like businesses that are allowed to have more outdoor operations as we get through the pandemic. As for non-conforming uses though, or non-conforming circumstances, if they would, like once the MADE project is enacted, let's say we come back in June, July of this year, we adopt the code, and a business that is allowed today now becomes prohibited or non-conforming, they would not be allowed to expand their footprint.
I see. Won't that be a problem for that business if this happens?
Good evening, Council. If you don't mind, I'll jump in on this one. Tom Clark, Community Development Director. So there's really two answers to this question. So as Hope said, if you're non-conforming use, you're not allowed to expand your business. The situation we're under right now, and with some of the things we've allowed to expand out into the street, it's a little different because we've allowed some of those things under the city's emergency ordinance. So if the emergency ordinance is in place, that can be looked at and can be evaluated case by case. If the emergency ordinance goes away, then they would not be allowed to expand in any way.
Oh, okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it was helpful, Tom. Thank you very much. Can I ask one last question and then I'll shut up? The other question was, it appeared like in the commercial zone, there was also residences allowed in the auto-friendly commercial zone. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the terminology. And so residences were allowed. Will noise be an issue for the residents? That's just a question. When you're talking, that kind of came up in my head. Hey, wait, if you're going to put residences next to these industrial manufacturing kind of environment, will noise be an issue for the residents? Is the question. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a great question. That's something that we are definitely carefully considering with this project. So currently under our existing code, industrial uses are exempt from our noise ordinance, but with the MADE project, that would no longer be the case. So we are developing some offsite impact standards that even industrial uses would have to abide by so that they would play nice with adjacent uses, just the way that other commercial uses would need to.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, other planning commissioners, please, with the number of people that are on the line, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands. Okay, Commissioner, is it Y. Kang?
It's Commissioner Hu.
Commissioner Hu, go ahead.
Sorry, my camera is not working. So yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Councilor, for the opportunity for the preview and ask staff for questions. So I have a question about the question of should the development code prioritize equity. So if we say yes, would you take that as a directive to expand the industrial sanctuary zone as much as possible? Is that the practical effect of us saying yes?
So yeah, if you were to say yes to that question tonight, I guess it's more of a nuanced question than just yes or no, but the kind of feedback that we're looking for is, do you agree with the way that we've presented it to you so far tonight? And the way that we're looking at it is that overall, some of our industrial land right now, the way that we've currently drafted the code, some of our existing industrial land will become maybe our CG land or our mixed use employment land. But then the industrial land that we do have left, we'll just be really careful about how we label industrial. So a lot of our current industrial land is taken up by a lot of low job density uses. And we would say, hey, going forward, the industrial land that we have left, we have to make sure that we're using it as job dense manufacturing sanctuary. So if a yes to that question would be, yes, please proceed with that direction. You are also free to give us recommendations to do something a little bit different.
So can you provide examples? I know you say research has shown that those industrial sanctuary zone will promote or advance equity, but can you provide actually specific examples of evidence linking such an industrial sanctuary zone with the advancement of equity? Have ever any city been shown to be successful in advancing equity through this industrial sanctuary zone?
So our reasoning for prioritizing manufacturing jobs and those types of jobs that we are prioritizing in our industrial sanctuary is based off of data that we've received through our economic opportunities analysis that shows the different job densities and also wage ranges and education requirements for different types of industries. It's also based off of state level economic data and also some studies that we've heard from the Metro Study Councils. And I think Lloyd also can step in on this one as well.
Sure, thanks, Hope. Yeah, it's a good question. Manufacturing jobs, as Hope mentioned, are typically lower barrier to entry jobs, relatively higher wage compared to maybe office jobs. And there's usually a career pathway for employees. And we're talking in general terms here, but typically manufacturing jobs are a way to add some employment equity into the local ecosystem. So that's what the employment manufacturing reserve would do. I don't know that, other cities have tried to create employment reserves or manufacturing reserves. Portland has, in fact, and that means there's an area dedicated to more manufacturing activity. And yes, those jobs, they range from entry level to a CEO, but in general, manufacturing has those characteristics of family wage jobs, lower barriers to entry, and career pathways. So that's the reasoning behind that. I don't have a specific study. I can track one down, I'm sure. I don't have one at hand to give you an answer on.
I'm going to jump in, if you don't mind, on this question as well. Just keep in mind, this whole project, we're talking about the city's zones and land use, and zoning is a limited instrument. We can only do so much, and it's really limited when you're talking about economic development. So we talk about these concepts and these goals, but remember, this is a limited tool we're trying to get the most out of. So is Tigard going to rapidly convert into all of these family wage jobs? No. But is it going to be an easier place to come to start a business to do that? Yes, hopefully. If we get the zoning right, that will happen. So temper all of this with, we're looking at zoning, which is a limited tool, but we're trying to fine tune it to get as much out of it as we can.
Yes, I think this sentiment is reflected in the economic opportunities analysis. It says that many aspects of equitable development cannot be addressed directly through land use initiative, but you also say that equity will be better addressed through other measures such as job training, community outreach, and affordable housing. So, so my concern, without a solid example of linking industrial zone with advance of equity, is that we do have limited employment lands for future growth. So in light of this limited thing that land use initiative can do for equity, I'm concerned that by over dedicating our land to this industrial zone, we are taking away opportunities from general economic zone or the other zone that are more flexible, that have opportunity to create more employments, right? So, and another thing from the EOA is that it says the Tiger residents has a relatively young workforce and relatively well educated. So I think maybe we should think more of leveraging those positive attributes of City of Tiger resident than focusing on this zone, this industrial zone that may or may not advance equity while taking away opportunities from other zoning that are more flexible. But I don't have any detail of the code amendment, so I will keep an open mind right now. But I'm just stuck on this question of whether we should prioritize equity through the code amendment. I support equity, of course, but I just don't know if prioritizing equity using the code amendment is the right tool, and it might take away opportunities for other development that will be more low-hanging fruit for us and more effective. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but I look forward to having this code amendment in front of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
That's a good point, and I will respond to that because it is a good point, and it's important to know. We're talking about policy choices tonight, and so we don't have very specific things to show you. But I can tell you, we're likely the actual industrial zone is likely to shrink somewhat, and that's because we're expanding the mixed-use employment zone. So remember, we're talking about job density. We're talking about industrial, manufacturing, and employment. So the employment zone is going to expand, and the industrial zones will slightly shrink, but will get tighter about what is allowed. That's where the industrial sanctuary part comes in. So we tighten up what's allowed in the industrial zones, focus it on higher density jobs, and then we expand the mixed use employment where we get a whole range of different things that and types of uses that mix well together or can mix well together. So I think overall, we will probably be expanding the opportunities or the amount of zoning for employment as a whole, if that makes sense. And I apologize, since we're talking about policy tonight, you don't have those maps and those specific things in front of you, but we'll get to that.
Mr. McGuire, thank you for that. And I want to thank the commissioner for making the points he was just making, because I just want to sort of lay this out there as everybody's thinking. The connection between equity and industrial land, I think, is something that I think Commissioner Hugh is struggling with, and so am I, and a little bit. And so as we're talking through this more, to the extent the staff can help us through seeing that connection better and more deliberately, and perhaps with evidence, I think we'll be better off. Commissioner Miranda?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, council and staff and commissioners, for having this opportunity to have this discussion. I have more comment and a little bit of question. And I'd like to start with what makes me uncomfortable with these statements, and that is prioritizing making walkability a priority. And it makes me uncomfortable in that I'd prefer to see something closer to human mobility. I think walkability is leaving out quite a few people who are disabled, and it would be more open if we could focus that way. And in on that, here on the commission, we tackle walkability in little bits about adding sidewalks here and there, or connecting safer streets. And I'm not sure how that is playing out here in this project, but along with mobility issues, personally, I struggle a little bit with the deletion of not allowing drive-throughs. Here we are out of the pandemic, and drive-throughs were quite the lifeline for a lot of people. And so that I'd like to, see the map, so that I really quite understood what that meant in this zoning discussion. So those were where I was a little bit uncomfortable. My questions come from the feedback that has been received over time. I know that there was some stakeholder meetings where some adjustments were made, and I was curious as to what those kind of conversations, what kind of impacts those made on this plan. And then also curious about that, not having a whole lot of feedback recently, what that lone person is struggling with these changes, suggested changes. And then from a personal standpoint, I'm an industrial lands advocate. I used to live in an industrial area. I appreciate our new housing development over by Agilix. I appreciate the sound of trains clanking over there, and the sounds of industrial machinery. It's comforting to someone who's worked in manufacturing and on fishing boats. I like the intersection of where our industrial lands connect with our other lands. So I'm pro industry sanctuary. Had one other thing and I've lost it, but again, I'm happy for this discussion and curious about what feedback impacts have made on this discussion already. What changes were made? Thank you.
So I can speak to the changes that were made based on the feedback that we have received. As highlighted in that in our memo that we sent out in advance of this meeting, we did have the town hall series where we sent out over 1,000 mailers, only got a few participants, but we did make some changes based off of just those discussions with those participants. And the changes are primarily where it regards that what is a new use category, offsite services. So we've pretty much been making some refinements to that. We have a square footage limit of 7,000 square feet for offsite services uses right now. I think originally we were considering prohibiting it outright in the MUE zone because, again, MUE zone is supposed to be all about pedestrian activity, and offsite services is a use that's very heavy on vehicles. To clarify, offsite services means it's pretty much uses where employees drive in the morning, drop off their personal cars, and take the employee vehicles out for the day where they work elsewhere in the region, and they're the employees aren't sticking around and kind of adding to the vibrancy of our local Tigard economy. So originally we were thinking, those are very auto-heavy uses. They should maybe not even be allowed at all in our MUE zone. And after talking to some business and property owners, we discovered, there are maybe some limits where they're so small in scale that they're really not interrupting the pedestrian activity. They're local small business owners. So we're also kind of enhancing equity in that regard of they may not be that sexy storefront business, but they are a local small business owner. And so we want to be able to support them. And that is similar to the comment that was the public comment that was sent out in advance of this meeting as well. I want to highlight that Lloyd and I have had a few discussions with this gentleman. He's been a delight to talk to. We wish that everybody was as involved as he is. And we are working with him on some refinements based on his feedback. And as you could see from his comment, I think one of his big concerns was still with offsite services. So we're looking forward to some more discussions with him as well.
I was curious about that comment. I was going to ask that, so thank you for that follow-up. Commissioner Miranda, did you have any further questions or follow-up?
No, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Okay.
Commissioner Brandt.
Good evening, folks. How are y'all doing? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I wanted to first reflect back what Miranda was saying about walkability. I think she brings a very good point. I would put forward the term active transportation as a probably more suitable term. It's kind of what I've been using at PSU during my studies, trying to build better neighborhoods through reconnecting them, sidewalks and paths and stuff like that. So we try to use the term active transportation because it implies people in mobility devices, children on skateboards, parents with strollers, bicycles, etc. So that's and then also I thought I would ask, just like to say to Commissioner Miranda about mixed use buildings and drive-throughs and things like that. But I think we already touched on that the building type may not allow for a drive-through due to access and then pedestrian conflicts. And we don't necessarily want a burger joint in the middle of a mixed-use development where we're trying to encourage people to walk around in there and maybe live in the upper floors. A good example is Greenway Plaza. The fast food joints in there make that difficult for people to negotiate on foot because of the high volume of traffic coming out of there. Same problem that 7-Eleven had when it was in the corner of there. So moving on to the next topic here, indoor entertainment. I just wanted to ask, because it says indoor entertainment will no longer be allowed in IL zone. I was just cautious that that wouldn't restrict the ability of someone to open a small restaurant to service the people in that industrial community, because I work as a machinist for the last 16 years and there are no places to eat in the corridors that are reserved for, that kind of industrial work. So every trip to get something to eat is a car trip, generating more traffic, more congestion, and putting more, more lives and more, it's not the optimal. So I would just want to clarify that indoor entertainment does not preclude the ability for someone to put a small eatery like a Subway or a hoagie shop or something like that. So those are my comments. Thank you.
And I'll just respond to that last concern that, actually that's one of the main things that that's another one of the main things that we're looking at with the industrial sanctuary is, yes, we are protecting manufacturing jobs overall, but we also, part of the equity issue is allowing all types of employees walkable access to services from their place of employment. So while you'll be really limited in the size of commercial sales and services in the industrial zone, you still will, we're actually probably allowing that more broadly than it's currently allowed under code, because we want to allow that walkable service for employees.
All right, Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, council and staff, for this opportunity for a discussion. I just have two, I think, fairly quick questions. The first relates to the non-conforming uses. In my time on the commission, it's come up once or twice that, separate from just issues of being unable to expand, businesses expressed that having their business on land that made it a non-conforming use made it more difficult for them to get financing that they needed. Has that topic come up at all?
Yes, that topic has come up, and I'll let Lloyd maybe elaborate on it a little more. We've had interviews with at least one lender who has indicated to us that it's not as big a problem as we feared that it might be, that he as a lender and his lending professional experience has not encountered that to be a problem. But Lloyd knows more of the business community and banking community and can maybe elaborate if that goes beyond my one interview so far.
Commissioner Jackson, good question. Ms. Pollard summed it up well. I hear that once in a while, not very often. And so I check around with lenders, the commercial lenders, and the one we most recently talked to, I forget which bank that was. Yeah, he said that's, the commercial lenders look at everything, but they don't often look at someone's zoning to decide if they should make a loan. So there might be other types of lending that matters. It's not from commercial banks, but I don't see. Yeah, I don't know that that's substantiatable. That that's substantive. That statement that we hear once in a while. I'm having a hard time confirming it. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. My other question, I think, is most relevant to the mixed-use employment zone. Another thing that has come up even more often is, especially when we're looking at cases involving mixed-use areas, it comes up a lot that people are hoping that a grocery store will go in or a corner market will go in. And I think there's a lot of unmet demand in the community to have a place that you can walk to get groceries. And I was curious if there's anything that we can do in code to encourage those sorts of businesses to develop.
Thank you. That's like a really important question, I think, and something that we have thought a lot about so far. We haven't so far come up with a solution for encouraging a specific use to go into a specific location, but it's something that we're still exploring and we'll continue to look into, because I know that that's a use that we hear a lot that folks want closer. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll jump in again. There's a general solution, and that's what we expect to see in the mixed-use employment zone, which is allowing more residential activity in amongst the employment activity. That's a change. We will allow residential activity not just in the general commercial area, but also in the MUE. That creates that demand. Residents with spending dollars for those local services. So sometimes with code, that's the closest we can get to that.
All right, council, who's ready to go? I know the Planning Commission's asked a lot of good questions, so they may have covered many of ours. Let's go with Councillor Shaw and then Councillor Newton.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to thank both Commissioner Hu and fellow planning commissioners for their thoughtful questions. Many of mine were included in that, and wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Hu and Chairman Hu's comments. I've spent 18 years in manufacturing and industry, and have actually never heard it called industry sanctuary. And I would ask that we keep it simple. If that means increasing jobs, let's say increasing jobs. Industry sanctuary is confusing. It's confusing to the Planning Commission. It's confusing to me. So question is on the slide 6 that you have, enhancing equity by establishing an industrial sanctuary. Are you increasing jobs? Yes or no? Are you increasing multiple jobs? Yes or no? So that doesn't need to be answered tonight, but I have a huge concern and a red flag with that. Also, with regards to, there is no data here. We haven't talked anything about how many jobs would be lost, how many jobs would potentially be gained. To me, this is, how could we even consider even discussing policy when we don't have adequate data? Third, the economic opportunities. why don't we just call it economic opportunities instead of couching it as industry or industrial sanctuary? And equity is very important, but let's have that addressed as equity, not embedding it into a term that really does not make sense, would be my comments. Fourth, and I think it's on slide 14, a question I would have is, how do you ensure that there is, and I'll use a plain word, hodgepodge building going on? You said there isn't any requirements with regards to height, type of business, density in the general commercial. To me, that's going to look just like 99. And as you know, I can't tell you how many complaints just on the year I've been on council we receive, and we can't even control 99. So that'd be my maybe a question and a comment for Senior Planner Warren. And then also, I'm a little perplexed by the answer with regards to zoning, because we've had a downtown potential merchant coming in who wanted to add an extra floor and was told that banking financing would not be available. That's a zoning issue. And so I'm perplexed how you can talk to a bank and not remember the name and can tell us that zoning is not going to be a problem when it comes to financing. So again, I would like to have additional data. I'm not saying it's not true. I would like to have some more facts and not just anecdotal information. So those would be my comments, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Any staff members want to respond to any of that? Mr. Purdy?
Sure, I should clarify for Councillor Shaw, that last point. What we have heard once in a while from businesses is that being characterized in a non-conforming status would jeopardize their financing. And when I've checked with bankers, they said that they don't have that problem. They don't look at non-conforming status. So it's not that zoning doesn't matter. Yeah, they wouldn't fund a project that's not allowed in a specific zone, but the non-conforming issue isn't the point. So that's the clarification I'm trying to make on that, on the last point. Now I've got your other points you mentioned, so we'll follow up with you on those.
Any other staff response or follow up on any of that?
I'll just respond to the general commercial, the question about the general commercial zone. So yes, you hit the nail on the head with 99 West, because that's exactly where we're proposing that the general commercial zone be located. So first I want to highlight that it's not that there are no standards in this zone, it's just that there will be no non-conforming uses made, because we're not making any uses that are currently allowed there prohibited with the MADE zoning. So that's what I was highlighting today. And then we're also allowing more uses along in the CG zone precisely because it's along 99 West. And we're recognizing that while overall as a city, we want to be more mobile, more friendly to active transportation, trying to correct myself on that wording already. We do recognize that auto-centric uses are still necessary, including like drive-throughs, like one of the commissioners mentioned, that those uses are still necessary. So we're not going to prohibit them citywide. We're just going to limit them to a corridor that's already auto-centric. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
I'm prepared to jump in on one other aspect of your comments, and that is data. We all would like as much data as we can get. Couple of quick answers back to zonings being a very blunt instrument, plus some of the things that we're looking at doing and proposing to do haven't really been done before, so there's not a lot of information out there. Third, we have, as part of our consultant team, economic development team who put the EOA together, but they've also teamed with one of the local consulting firms that works with developers, industries in siting and putting projects through land use, and they're testing our code. That's pretty much the closest we're going to get to data, because and you say that you feel uncomfortable making these types of decisions without data, but we don't, because zoning is such a blunt and vague instrument, we don't really know exactly what the reaction is going to be in the market to what we do. The primary thing we're trying to do is stay out of the way of the market as much as possible, influence certain things. That's the question about prohibiting certain types of low density job uses. That's something we can do with zoning. But again, it's going to be up to the market. All of the things that go into a market analysis as to which companies or jobs actually come in to take advantage of what we're putting together. And we're trying to be as flexible as we can, so as industry, as it's been doing, as it changes and the way people operate and the way things are done, as it changes into the future, we're not constantly having to change our code, but we're trying to stay flexible enough to accommodate those types of changes, because probably the one thing we can do with zoning is to not cost a prospective business or company a lot of money to come through our process. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Let's go to Councillor Newton, and then Youth Councillor Nog, then Councillor Goodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we've had a really robust discussion. I appreciate everybody's questions. I just had a couple of things. I sort of agree with Councillor Shaw in the term industrial sanctuary. To me, that term sounded really limiting. And as you were speaking and talking, you're going to allow a little bit of commercial. You're going to allow a little bit of that. When I heard sanctuary, I thought, this is all we're going to allow, period, no. And I thought, maybe it's the old planner in me. How realistic is that? There's going to be some complementary uses that we're going to have to allow, or it's not going to work. So I think we might want to think of another term. I think sanctuary might come across to people who might be investigating this as more limiting than it is. I think focusing on the job equity is good and trying to encourage manufacturing jobs. You made the comment, I'll just make my comments, then you can take the questions. When you talked about being industry specific, if that means more than manufacturing, I'm concerned, you know, how specific you are in the code, because again, you might not get those industries. And that also might be another thing that has people walk away, say, well, I don't meet that. And then we talked about they couldn't, non-conforming uses couldn't expand their building footprint or operation. Is it both? Because I might have a non-conforming use and be able to add shifts. So I'm expanding my operation. So if I get footprint, but if you say operation, you know, that's another thing. So the other thing that I think we have to think about with manufacturing is there's probably going to be some distribution. I don't know that you can, some manufacturing firms need to have some distribution. So I think we need to think about that. It could be limited, but I think we need to think about that. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned about industrial sanctuary. It sounds, I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, I think you're not intending to be as limiting as it sounds. You want to have appropriate complementary uses with that in that area. I think limiting the area, you know, I know we're going to take away some of the actual land and make it more focused on this idea of creating manufacturing jobs. Everybody talks about how well Tualatin does tax-wise because they have a pretty big manufacturing base there. So if we want to try to have some job density, this is important. So the last thing I'll say is I appreciated Commissioner Miranda's term of not using walkability. My brother-in-law is in a scooter. He needs to be able to drive to the area and then get his scooter out. So he's got to get sort of close places with the car. So we need to think about that. And then I think as long as we allow uses somewhere, you know, I don't know that we want to prohibit uses in Tigard, but as long as we're clear about where they're allowed, like if we expand the mixed use employment area, that's going to open up more employment area. So I think that can work. I appreciate Assistant Community Development Director McGuire's reminder that zoning is a tool. So this isn't the be all end all, but it is a tool that we can use to try to encourage the type of development and land uses that we want to see in our city. So thank you.
As I hear Councillor Newton describing the industrial sanctuary terminology, it seems to me like what you all may be meaning is more of like an industrial focus or something like that. So that may better reflect what you're trying to achieve. Youth Councillor Nog?
One of the things I wanted to comment on was pedestrian safety when it came to walking accessible places. So I know that the sidewalk in front of Tigard High has a system where it like actually physically flashes. And I was wondering if there were places where you could like monitor where there was pedestrian heavy traffic, or like predict it and implement one of those flashing pedestrian walking signs to have more cars be able to see and maybe stop.
Oh, Lloyd's writing down your question. Yeah, I think that's part of a mapping project that Lloyd's actually working on right now, is partially mapping areas of the city with like high traffic incidents and stuff like that. Whether that can actually translate into projects is another question that I think we'd have to just earmark it for other conversations that we're having. Lloyd and Tom can correct me. I don't think it's not something we could write into our land use code, but definitely something of concern and interest.
Youth Councillor Nog, anything further?
We could consider also including it in our list of incentives, our incentive structure that we highlighted for you in previous meetings. So I do hear that as a good good suggestion that we'll take. We'll think on it.
Yeah, if we're wanting to promote active transportation, it's a good way to make that happen. All right, Councillor Goodhouse.
Thank you. There are a lot of good comments, a lot of things I agree on, and a lot of work I think still needs to be unpacked on this. I think a lot more discussion, a lot more work on this. I'm gonna hit some of the areas that I feel like haven't been hit, but definitely want to see this come back, a lot more discussion put into. I know we're way behind tonight. A couple things that just kind of popped out on me and that seemed to contradict. One of the parts is when we did the lean code in the triangle, a whole part of that was to allow businesses to start on a small footprint and then be able to expand. And that was kind of a lot of our philosophy, was that for startups, for people that maybe it's harder to start a business up, they initially start with one person, maybe a cart. They're on a footprint of land where it's bigger space, and the whole part was to allow them to be able to expand and grow that business where they can expand out and have the options to make it a lot easier to grow out. Now it seems like unless I'm wrong, we're going backwards on that concept of a lot of those businesses that may have started out with that thought that I can expand this business or grow, now are not able to. And if we're also putting those different barriers in there, it seems like it might be harder for businesses to start up that don't have those entries into the market to start out with a bigger business or meet those requirements. If they have to have a certain amount of space or a certain amount of employees or certain wage, that makes it a lot harder to have some of these different diverse businesses start up as well. But and this goes back to our conversation 2 weeks ago, it sounds like we're building a framework, but we don't know what we want to attract. And we're still not addressing the additional issue of what businesses do we want to see? What types of businesses do we want? Councillor Newton mentioned a little bit about Tualatin. I know we've talked about that before, but if we're looking at certain different types of restaurants, or one of the commissioners mentioned more places to eat, we're talking about more manufacturing jobs. What are their needs going to be? What is it going to be? If we come up with a list of what we want Tigard to look like and the areas to look at, and then build the codes and the parameters around it, it seems like all that needs to play together, unless I'm missing something. But how do you, it's like sitting down with a contractor and say, okay, let's build this foundation, and then later, pick a type of house you want, and you realize, well, wait, I wanted a 3-story house that was wide, but the foundation we've built won't hold that house or won't accommodate it. If we don't really understand what Tigard residents want, we want the playing field to look like, then we can't really put all these restrictions down. And if others aren't really doing this, and we have, and this is something new, why are we starting a process, as Tom said, if other cities really aren't doing this, but we have Hillsborough, Tualatin, Lake Oswego that are all succeeding with their downtown areas, they're growing. You know, Tualatin's got the land researches, Lake Oswego's got a great downtown. Hillsborough's doing a lot of private public partnerships. Why are we doing this as opposed to looking at what other cities are doing? I know I threw a lot out there. There's probably a lot more to discuss, but I'm still not tracking a lot of this compared to where we want to go as a city, what our plan is, and how are we going to, even if this goes into place, well, still, what's our plan to attract the businesses we want here and the makeup there? To me, it seems like just adding another tool in the toolkit, but we don't know what we're going to be working on or what we need to do.
Thank you.
Well,
Tom.
I'll take a quick shot at that, Hope. So the first one I would respond to is your comment about
We lost you, Tom, or at least I did.
We lost him.
Okay.
I think I can speak to some of it while we wait on Tom to get reconnected. Watching, he's still frozen. So I did want to highlight that one regarding the lane code and the triangle. And some of the framework behind that was focusing on allowing incremental growth. We're definitely still looking at allowing that from both a development, like building perspective, and also business perspective. There are just certain businesses that we're placing limits on because they are not job dense. And then regarding building a framework, that's exactly why we're here tonight with you guys, asking you these policy questions. What we've prepared so far is using the strategic plan and the city council goals as our framework. And now as we're putting those into very specific development code updates, we're bringing those to you and saying, okay, did we get the strategic plan right? Did we get the city council goals right? So that's why the way that we've developed it doesn't focus on attracting specific businesses, but it does focus on those three goals of equity, job density, and walkability. So we're here tonight to ask you guys, are those the three things that we should be prioritizing with these updates? And if so, just acknowledging that, yeah, there are going to be some non-conforming situations, because when you're prioritizing one thing, another thing, becomes non-conforming. So that's what we've taken so far as the foundation, is the strategic plan objectives and city council goals, and then turning that into those three priorities. So we really want your feedback tonight on, did we get those three priorities right?
Tom, did you want to add?
Yeah.
Now that you're back.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologize. Think Smart dropped my connection for some reason. But I was going to make the point that Tualatin, Hillsborough, and those cities have, compared to us, enormous amounts of industrial land and a lot of room to expand that industrial land on the edges of the urban growth boundary. And we don't have that. Looking at those figures from our EOA, we are enormously constrained, and even the land that we have that is being used by, frankly, several businesses and industries that are extremely low job density. So there's a lot of land being used to store stuff that people aren't working on. So that's part of one of the questions for tonight, is how can we take the small amount of industrial land that we have, or employment land, I should broaden that category, and make it easier to attract businesses with higher job density. That's really the whole point of this project, and really what we're trying to do with this, again, blunt instrument of zoning. How can we make that zoning accommodate that goal as much as possible? And with zoning, you really can't write zoning regulations to attract a certain business. That's a different aspect of what the city does. That's economic development. That's, frankly, a different conversation with a different set of people. This is just, what can we do with our current zones and the limited amount of industrial land that we have that will make it as user-friendly and as attractive to job-heavy businesses as we can. And one of the biggest questions that I was hoping to get to tonight was this question of, if we move forward along this policy line, there could likely be some areas where we make some businesses non-conforming. And so before we move too much further along with that, we wanted to gauge the Planning Commission and the Council's temperature on that, your willingness to, how far to go to try to accommodate higher density jobs in these areas. So
it's a good question, Tom, and one we really need to think about in the environment where we're kind of flying without data, and we're sort of, what I hear you saying, or both of you saying, is really that this is potentially innovative, but that also is quite risky when you've got no data or experience. Councillor Goodhouse, did you have any further follow-up?
I still, I think this is going to be a lengthy, but I still don't understand which jobs fall into that whole high density category. I mean, we're still building a foundation, or still building a ship, but still not knowing what cargo is going to be on it, what's going to be in it. I mean, we're still putting these restrictions in place, but we don't know what that's going to meet, what that's going to attract, what we're going to do with it. All we really know right now, from what it sounds like, is that we're going to kick out some businesses that have been, Tiger businesses. But what are we going to accomplish? What's the end game for this? I mean, if we're looking, obviously, we want more high density jobs. We want a certain living wage jobs, but what does that look like, and who are we going to attract, and what's this going to attract? And is that what we want? And is that even available out there to be attracted? It just seems too many variables. And I still see this pushing out a model that now you take, we talk so often about giving programs to startups, to people that don't have the resources to banking or availability or resources or things. And now we're making this, which seems like an extreme hurdle to even open anything, which would only be top tier established any kind of entities or businesses that would come in. And who do we want those to be? And is this going to be something that might push out any kind of starter businesses that don't have very much employees or capital or space? So these are all the things that are passing my mind, but I really want to know with what we're targeting with these requirements.
Well, we can get that information to you, and we'll definitely be there when we bring the full package to you later on. I can't name you specific businesses, but I can certainly talk to you about different types of business sectors and how much, on average, how many employees per acre or whatever that those types of sectors have, what areas of Tiger that, and the way we're zoning and proposing regulations, which areas would be attractive to those versus others. We can definitely bring that information to you, and that will certainly be part of the whole package when it comes to you.
Tom, when you're talking about industrial properties or industrial businesses, as you're describing here, how much of that is sort of synonymous with, and I think it might be easier for, at least for me and perhaps others to understand, are we really talking about traded sector types of things, or is it more than that?
I am going to, Lloyd, I'm going to let Lloyd take that one.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Mayor Snyder. By traded sector, are you thinking about companies that produce a good or service here, but then it's exported somewhere else, in fact, beyond the region, certainly beyond the city?
Isn't that the standard common definition of that term? I mean, am I missing? Please, if I'm wrong about that, please correct me, but isn't that the definition? Okay. So is that what we're talking about here?
So, right, for our industrial zone, both our heavy and our light industrial zone, we're trying to create a space where we can have more of that type of activity. So more manufacturing, more traded sector. Right now, much of that space is being used by other types of businesses that is, as Mr. McGuire mentioned, have large land needs, but not a lot of employment needs, or they're not doing what you could also call value-added manufacturing. So yes, trying to create space for that. I summarize this by saying to my colleagues in economic development, if we're more selective there, we can also be more flexible elsewhere in the city. So again, the general commercial area of the city, we allow more things to happen. But in the manufacturing zones, the light and the heavy industrial zones, we're proposing to become more selective in what we allow. That's what this boils down to from an economic development perspective. So it allows us to,
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Lloyd.
Just to say that allows us then to recruit more and welcome more businesses from, for instance, traded sector manufacturing into that space. We don't have space for them now. We're land constrained and have high occupancy rates. So I can pause.
Council President Lube, you've been extremely patient while every single other member of the commission and council has spoken. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, for me, it takes a little bit of time to like listen to everybody and form my questions and listen to their questions and noodle through everything. So I really appreciate the robust conversation and the hard questions, because this is a big deal, talking about how are we going to rezone these areas of Tigard. I understand that using the zoning in such a way to create these cool areas that are, you know, more accessible. And by the way, I love human mobility and active transportation. Thank you so much for that verbiage. And it makes me start to think, okay, where do we have walkability in our city documents where it should really be updated and more inclusive? So thank you so much for bringing that up. But you know, in concept, I understand that we're changing the zoning to create these areas that would be a place that you can hang out and be more accessible. And for me, I'm just having a really, really hard time without having that visual map over the map that has the red, or two maps side by side that's saying, this is where we want to do this. This is where we're looking at doing this. Because, you know, I don't take it lightly that these businesses that have decided to make their homes in Tigard and are employing people and paying taxes in Tigard are going to be impacted by this. So I think it would be really helpful to understand contextually, even just visually, where you're looking to do things, even if it's not finalized in the pretty package. It would allow me to have better context to have just sort of a more educated conversation on this. I do have some questions other than, can we get a color-coded map with potential zones? Have we been approached by businesses that aren't allowed in spaces but would be allowed in new areas that are being proposed? Like a business that is like, hey, I really want to come to Tigard, but I'm not allowed in this zone that has this one space. Mr. McGuire, you're shaking your head. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, we have. That was one of the things that started this whole project off.
Looks like we lost him again.
Lloyd. Turn off my mute button. Back and jump in. Sorry, getting some background noise somewhere. So yes, my planning colleagues see it more often than I do. Businesses that say, I want to do this type of activity, and it's not clearly defined because business trends are changing. It's no longer just retail. Maybe it's a brew pub that also wants to have a restaurant. Well, our current code doesn't know how to handle something that's that complex. Are they producing beer or are they a restaurant? So what Tigard Made is doing in many cases is allowing more blending of uses. We're getting less finicky, is a term Tom likes to use. We're getting less finicky in almost every area of the city, being more welcoming and allowing more, but not less finicky in that industrial area. Tom, did I summarize what you were saying about?
Yes.
For instance,
I apologize. I have no idea what's going on with my Think Smart device tonight, but yes, my point was we have had to turn businesses away, or potential businesses away. There was, I know one of them was they wanted to do a brew pub. So you had the brewing, manufacturing, you had the pub, restaurant, and they wanted to be able to let people come in and adopt dogs. So brew pub, manufacturing, dog adoption, the code blew up. We could not handle that. So, and we're seeing more and more and more of those types of things. People are very creative, and all of this stuff is just not fitting our current use categories, our current zone things. So that's really what we're trying. That's one of the things we're really trying to address, is to be able, and when I talked about flexibility, is to be able to handle those kinds of curveballs that get thrown at us.
I mean, brew pub restaurant and like petting dogs just sounds like a wonderful place to go. No, that's really helpful context to understand that it's really that our, trying to allow more flexibility for these kinds of businesses. So on the flip side of that, my opposite, the other concern I have is for the existing businesses that would be non-conforming. I know that we have non-conforming situations already, across the city. And I'm wondering, do we have examples of businesses that can speak to the way that that's impacted their ability to not expand, or have they eventually just moved out of Tigard because of it? What's the impact on the opposite side? Because this isn't the first time we're going to have non-conforming. Lloyd, would you be able to speak to that?
Sure, I can. We don't often have exit interviews with businesses when they close or leave, so I don't often know why a business leaves. When a business is non-conforming, they usually operate as long as they can on that site, and then if they have to grow, we have seen companies buy a second or rent or lease a second location somewhere else to complete that that business model activity, that activity they're doing. So so it's not always the end of a business just because they can't expand their footprint. But ultimately, from an economic development perspective, land use code does set the direction we want the city to go. And so sometimes we do have to say we want more manufacturing and less warehousing, for instance, right? We do have to use code as that blanket tool. So back to non-conforming, it's hard for me to tell. It's hard for us to tell, I think, how impactful it is.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I will just say that I agree and understand and appreciate a lot of the questions and comments today. And it feels like we're all just a little bit head scratching on exactly what this would look like and having a better understanding. And I'm not sure without that, I'd be comfortable giving just more guidance or having the next time that we talk about the subject when we're voting on code. Would it be possible to have sort of like an interim with a little, like some more information to bring us along with you during this process?
Yes, we can do that. We can, we've done this different ways with council, planning commission and council. Some projects we've come to you directly with the draft code, and we've had that discussion with the public. And other times, and in this case, I think we can do a workshop first. We can bring the draft code not for your adoption, but for your review and discussion to workshop it and gauge your comfort level with that before we move to the next level of adoption.
Great, and I would ask the planning commissioners to also attend because y'all's questions were amazing, so thank you. And that's all I have for tonight and this topic. Thanks.
Youth Councilor Nog, you've had your hand up for a while. Are you still wanting it up? No. Okay. Councilor Newton, and I just had some of Tom's gremlins, so all of you be forewarned. I just got kicked out and had to come back into the meeting. Councilor Newton.
Yeah, this is real quick. I didn't speak to non-conforming. I think 6 months is typical. That's my memory. But I'm wondering in this time of COVID, when we've got so many vacant buildings, if I don't know, I would wonder about 6 months. Maybe we should go a little longer. Just would want you to think about that. And then is there something that we could think about in this industrial focus zone we could think about doing if a non-conforming use does go out? Is there something our ACE economic development team can put together to try to focus on getting one of the industries, the manufacturing industries into the space? I mean, is there, could we look at how long a building could be vacant now, because of all these vacancies? And then when it becomes obvious that a business is going to move on, the business is going to be vacant, what could we do incentive-wise or just to try to help focus on getting that space filled with the business we want? So I know we've gone beyond zoning, I agree with you, we're talking about zoning, but when we come to business attraction, not in the code necessarily, but could we do something to try to help focus moving a business into that space? So I'm not sure right now 6 months is enough. Maybe it is. You all may have some thoughts on that for a later discussion, but I would have concerns right now because there's so many vacant buildings.
All right, I want to do a little time check. We're over almost an hour over time, and we were scheduled to be done at 9:15. That's definitely not going to happen. Just want to acknowledge that. I didn't even make really, I guess I made a couple side comments, but I'm going to just hold my comments on this whole Tigard Made discussion. I think there's a lot more work to do, clearly a lot of discussion that needs to happen. And I think your staff, if you're getting anything out of this, it seems like there's a lot of questions and frankly, some reluctance to sort of push the way that's being described. At least that's my summary of it. Do you all feel like you have between you and Lloyd and Tom, do you all have what you were hoping to get tonight? I know it's probably not what you were hoping, but at least you've got some answers.
I feel like we do, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I thought it was a good discussion. It's good to hear where everyone's at. It's good to check in and find out where we need to tune things up and be more clear. So yeah, I think it's very valuable.
All right, I want to check in with the city manager real quickly on the agenda here. We've got a charter interpretation, community input update, which when we get to that, I'm going to hand over to Council President Lube, and then a housing compliance code update briefing. City Manager Reimer, are you thinking we should try to push through and get both of those done? I just am concerned that I don't think people are going to do their best work at 10 o'clock at night. So what do you suggest here?
I do think we should try for both items. I think the next one will be we're recommending really receiving the information and not a dialogue with the council on the information being received. So we put 30 minutes, I believe, in the agenda, but it could be much shorter than that, which would buy some time for the next item, which would be important to try to have tonight.
Okay. With that said, we'll try to get through the whole agenda. I am going to recuse myself from the following item number 6 and hand the meeting over to Council President Lube. Let me know when you are ready for me to come back.
Thank you. And I believe this item is being presented by Communications Manager Wyatt. And so with that, I will turn that over to him.
Thank you, Council President Lube, and good evening, Council. Kent Wyatt, Communications Manager. I want to provide you with an update, on the charter interpretation outreach that we've done so far. And attached to this agenda item, you'll find the survey results that we've received from the community. Two real purposes of this agenda item. One is just to share that status report about the number of community members we've reached and how we've reached them, and then provide a very high level recap of what those efforts have shown. As a reminder for those who are listening, this project at the direction of council, community members are being asked to address 3 questions regarding input to inform the council's interpretation of the current language of Section 7 of the charter. One thing that we've stressed throughout this is that we're working with the existing text as written. Council is not considering changes, nor can they at this point. It's really just the community's interpretation of what exists in the document now. So high level, so far we've heard from 93 Tigard community members who have completed the online input form. Those are all Tigard community members, or at least have indicated that they are on the input form. We also, to avoid duplicate entries, have an IP address check, so to ensure that it's just one entry per person. And in terms of how we've reached our audience, we've kind of broken it down into 3 different sections. Our key partners. So first and foremost, our Committee for Community Engagement, which you met some of those new members tonight. That 15-member board had a robust discussion about this topic. Our Community Roundtable, which is led by faith-based and nonprofit leaders. That's a group that meets virtually, and also a list of about 63 individuals. We're also presented with this item. Digitally, we've promoted this heavily in our city newsletter the last several issues, which goes out to over 30,153 email addresses. And on social media, we've done some targeted campaigns to boost posts that will show up in certain areas of the community that are often underrepresented. We've done that on Facebook and Instagram, and have seen solid results from that based on the analytics. And then last, as you guys know, not everybody is on social media, and folks receive information differently. So paper/hard copy is also another avenue that we've done. The Tigard Life, it's been included in multiple editions of Tigard Life. It's been on our reader board in front of City Hall, along with the kiosks that we now have outside of City Hall, that we have paper flyers out there for people walking by, and that can see that opportunity and hopefully go home and take that survey. So for those who are listening, the input opportunity is still open on our website. So folks are more than encouraged to complete that brief form to share their input on the charter interpretation. And as next steps, I'm here to answer any questions that you may have about the outreach that we've done so far.
Thank you. I think for sure, you know, as you've indicated, we've tried to reach out in a multitude of different ways, and the amount of survey responses that we've gotten back are a testament to the fact that we're reaching people, and we're certainly getting opinions. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions on the outreach of the city, or additional recommendations on ways that we can do that? Councilor Goodhouse, is that your question or your comment?
Yes, I had a quick question for Kent. I don't know if Kent was listening at the beginning of the call-in comments, but caller was wanting about the names. I'm curious of why the names had been made public, and if there was a part on there that stated that the names would be or remain anonymous. It sounded like the caller was under the impression that the names would be anonymous, and why we included the names.
Sure, I did hear the caller. And I can tell you on the input form, the language says survey responses or survey results will be shared with council. So I would say it's that's the way it's stated. And I'm not exactly sure what that caller was getting at. It was stated up front that the results, as for the names, that's not a decision that I've been a part of.
And Councilor Goodhouse, I know in previous meetings you have indicated that you have recused yourself from the conversation, and I know that the council has been alerted that you have changed your mind, but I want to give you an opportunity to address that with the council and address that with the public, that sort of why you're now participating in the conversation, so there's no confusion.
Yeah, initially I was recusing it whether or not there may be or not a perceived conflict, but then I know from the last, I think it was the meeting in January or something like that, that I know that yourself, Council President Lube, had asked some questions. And so with me kind of initially bringing some of this forward to have this looked at by the council and having questions being brought in to answer questions, figured it was best to stay part of the conversation. As far as I thought this was something that council needed to address and weigh in on before the upcoming election and give clarity on it.
Councilor Shaw, you had your hand raised. Did you change your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Lube. I actually was just going to ask a question about also releasing the names. I wasn't sure what the form had said, so I just had a similar question, but it was answered, so thank you, Kent.
Well, and I mean, just to be clear on the AIS, that information has not been released widely. It's something that I did ask for us to be able to see as counselors, to be able to understand and have access to the information of whether or not they're a Tigard resident. I think that's an important part of the discussion if we're considering people's opinions on our charter. Councillor Newton?
Yeah, just really quick. I think I heard that people were encouraging people to provide input until April, what is it, 3rd, 4th? There's the Sunday before the 8th. Could you clarify that date, Mr. Wyatt?
Yeah, and I think Council President, there's been some discussion. We want to make sure, we want to ensure that you have enough time to see those results. So maybe a few days earlier than that. So you have time to review them before your next council discussion, which is in early April.
Yeah, City Manager Reimer sent that out, and my response is that it would be nice to have more than just a day to review, depending upon our schedules and what we may have going on. So my next question was going to be, how far in advance should we receive those results? And then that will sort of dictate when we will receive public comment through. Councillor Shaw? Councillor Goodhouse, your hand is still up. Did you have a question?
I'll take it down for now, but I'll have one later.
Okay. Councillor Shaw?
I think Councillor Newton was before myself. Oh, okay. I was going to ask
Lots
a different.
of hands going up and down.
I was just going to ask a separate question, so I didn't interrupt the train of thought and Kent's answering that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be nice for us to have the results, more than the Monday before. I didn't know if there was a preference on how far in advance all of you would like the results. Should we shut it down on, Tuesday the 29th to allow staff to have time to compile and send it to us? Do we feel as though that's sufficient time for the community to give us input, or should we extend it?
I think maybe as long as we give advance notice. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody that has provided input. It's really helpful. So really thank everybody for that. But if we close it on the 29th, that gives the team time to compile, and then it can come to us as part of our packet for that meeting. Because I'm retired, but those of you that work, it's pushing it a little to get something on Monday when you have to work. So anyway, so that would be my suggestion. I think we want to be really clear and encourage folks to continue to provide input. But if we could maybe close it at 5 p.m. on the 29th, maybe that would be good.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Shaw, Councillor Goodhouse, are you in agreement with receiving comments through the 29th?
Yes, but I guess I wanted to throw some input too, and this kind of goes back to your question of why I kind of brought myself back in the conversation. Is some of the comments that have been put in by the public have made a comment too that, should we be making these decisions, or should a body that doesn't have any conflicts or motives be making this decision? Because I kind of looked at it as what really defines a conflict in here. I mean, if we're looking at and really kind of talking what's happening, we have an election coming up in November. The mayor's running for election. I've announced for running for mayor. We have two councilors, both yourself, Councilor President Lube, and Councilor Newton, that have endorsed the mayor publicly. So you look at these different conflicts, and what do we look at as far as a body that, what constitutes a true conflict, what's more a perceived conflict, and should we as a council really be deciding this, or should we have an independent body of more maybe attorneys or something like that makes this decision?
I'd like to invite City Attorney Rahala to hopefully turn on her camera and be a part of this conversation, since I think it goes to the legal question of conflicts. But I do believe that it is within our city charter, our code, that the city council does interpret when there are questions. And so it's within our own charter that we answer the question. And City Attorney Rahala has confirmed that there are no potential conflicts or actual conflicts with the Oregon Ethics Commission, I believe, but I will let her speak to that.
So correct, Council President Lube, with one caveat. So it's not our charter that says that council interprets. That's actually Oregon law. Under Oregon law, if a charter is ambiguous, the city council is given the authority to interpret it, and so that is recognized by case law. And yes, so under Oregon ethics law, ethics conflicts of interest focus on financial benefits and detriments. So we have confirmed with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission that because there is an intervening election and that no counselor is guaranteed a financial benefit or avoidance of a financial detriment as a result of this action, that there are no conflicts of interest from a legal perspective.
Thank you, City Attorney. Councilor Goodhouse, did you have any follow-up questions or comments?
No, just that, I mean, I don't know if we're taking suggestions. I would just like to make a suggestion that rather than us as a council make that decision, that we have an independent body make this final decision.
Councilor Newton or Councilor Shaw, do you have any comments or questions, or do you want to discuss Councilor Goodhouse's suggestion?
Well, I guess this is a little different from what I thought the item was today, but, first of all, I'd like to think that we all can focus on the matter at hand. I see it as an interpretation of the charter and the language in the charter. I thought it was important, and we've had criticism both ways, that our voters, our community weigh in because they're the ones that have voted initially on the charter. It is confusing, and I think it's, I take it as our responsibility. By state law, we're charged with interpreting the charter where there's ambiguous language, and I'd like to think that we all can be objective in doing that. So I think it's our responsibility. So,
Councilor Shaw, did you have anything to add?
No, not at this time. I'm channeling like the mayor and the city manager to keep us on time, and want to just be thankful for Communications Manager Kemp for providing this information. But I did have a lot of other questions along the same lines, but I can hold them until our next discussion.
Okay, thank you. I will just say that I'm in alignment with Councilor Newton. I think this is part of the reason that I hope after this that we start a charter review process, so there isn't this ambiguity, there isn't these questions, and we can have some solid answers moving forward. And I mean, it's unfortunate that we're sitting here looking at ambiguous language and having to interpret that, but that's what Councilor Goodhouse has asked us to do, and that's what the state of Oregon tells us is in our power to do, and charges us with that. So we have been asked to answer this question, and so we are taking on the responsibility of answering it. So thank you, Communications Manager Wyatt. We will see you April 5th, which will be the first of potentially several conversations regarding this matter. And I do want to thank all of the community members. I've read all of the input. I try to keep up on, the conversations online and talking offline with individuals. And so this is certainly something that we've asked for your input, and we are taking it into consideration. Councilor Goodhouse, did you have anything final to say before we move on?
Yes, and I just wanted to just kind of close up a comment. As far as with me having this being looked at, this is not something I'm looking at that would benefit me either way. As it stands, I'm at the end of my 2 terms as council, and fall within the regular terms of the 12 years to be able to run for mayor. So it's not something that I brought forward to either help myself or not. It's something that there's, as you mentioned, there's ambiguity in the language, and that's something that needs to be resolved and looked at and fixed. So by me, I just want to make it clear if anyone's watching that I didn't bring this forward to try to extend my time or extend anything that I would be that would be benefiting myself. It was just more to clarify the language and make sure we know what needs to be done, or how going forward, what applies and what rules do apply, and timelines.
Thank you. Thank you, Communications Manager Wyatt. Did you have anything else for us before we move on to the next item on the agenda?
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for your time. And I will hand the meeting back over to Mayor Snyder so we can move on to agenda item number 7. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item number 7, Housing Compliance Code Update Briefing. Senior Planner Warren, staff report, please.
Good evening, Mayor Snyder and members of the City Council. My name is Skylar Warren, and I'm a Senior Planner in the Department of Community Development. And I think my presentation should be showing now. I'm here this evening to provide you with a briefing on a mini code project underway that will bring the city into compliance with state law related to housing. First, I want to provide a little bit of the background and history on this work. In 2017, the Oregon Legislative Assembly passed Senate Bill 1051. This was the first in a series of housing-related bills that will cumulatively change the way that housing is provided for in our city and across the state. This bill required cities to legalize accessory dwelling units in all zones and also changed the definition of needed housing to include all housing, which meant that all housing would be subject to only clear and objective standards. The City of Tigard used the opportunity presented by Senate Bill 1051 to make housing policy updates in line with the adopted recommendations of the city's most recent housing needs analysis. The Phase 2 Housing Options Project included a number of changes, including legalizing middle housing in most zones, allowing accessory dwelling units in every zone, consolidating our duplex and triplex housing types into ADUs, providing clear and objective standards for housing, reducing off-street parking requirements, removing housing tenure, and consolidating residential use categories. Following quickly after Tigard's action, the Oregon Legislative Assembly again acted to expand housing opportunity across the state. House Bill 2001, passed in 2019, legalized middle housing across the state and required that cities of Tigard size come into compliance within 30 months. At that time, the city was largely in compliance with the terms of the bill, but there were administrative rules to follow. Those rules were completed and published in 2021. While the city had been compliant with the bill, the rules were far more specific, and so city teammates set about auditing the code and working with staff at the Department of Land Conservation and Development to determine what, if any, changes would be needed. While that work was occurring, the Legislative Assembly acted once again in the 2021 session, passing Senate Bill 458. This bill requires that the middle housing developments allowed under House Bill 2001 are eligible for middle housing land divisions, which create discrete units of land that can be transferred by deed. So that brings us to tonight's briefing on our work to bring the city's development code into compliance with state law and administrative rules. While on the whole, the city is already in compliance with the broad provisions of House Bill 2001, we do need to make some updates. We also want to bring the city into compliance with the provisions of Senate Bill 458 at the same time. And of course, as always, we learn from the implementation of the code over time what works and what doesn't. And so we want to make some small changes that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the code and provide even more housing opportunity for Tigard's current and future residents. Thematically, this compliance project has 3 major components. The first is an update to the processes used to approve housing development. In general, we will need to approve middle housing developments without a land use process involved where a development can meet clear and objective standards. In addition, we need to make some updates to our standards themselves as they apply to certain middle housing types. And then finally, we are capping this work with a simplification and streamlining of our residential zones. Given the many changes in state law and the requirements that we allow middle housing in all zones at the same densities and with the same opportunity as is available to single detached houses, Tigard's 8 residential zones have become more indistinct. So I know that we're tight on time and you all still have an executive session after this, so I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are currently with our updates to the approval process As I mentioned before, all middle housing development covered by HB 2001 must be approved only through a plan check process with no land use. But because this process does not offer the flexibility needed for a range of developments, we are also proposing a parallel process that allows an applicant to choose a land use process in exchange for a more discretionary review. So the way this looks is someone comes in with a middle housing proposal, path 1, which is the one that's required by state law, meet clear and objective standards. You go to plan check at the counter. It's signed off on by planning, and you go to building permits. Path 2, which is the option that an applicant can choose at their discretion, allows for them to go through a land use process with clear and objective standards with some limited discretion, and that would be through a type 2 land use application. So the way that that would specifically look, or the kind of distinctions between those processes for some housing types, cottage clusters, for example, path 1, we would remove the parking reduction option and prohibit adjustments, retain the courtyard standards that we currently have. Through path 2, we would retain the current parking reductions that we have and then modify the courtyard standards to make them more flexible. If anything, with the middle housing, with both courtyard units and cottage clusters, definitely courtyard criteria are probably the most vexing for an applicant to meet. And then for both those processes, we're looking at removing the prohibition on dumpsters and reducing the parking buffer on site. Similar for quads, we would have a clear and objective process that would retain some of our current standards, and then perhaps add a second pathway that would allow different configurations of a quad. For row houses, same thing, retain our current standards, but perhaps allow some more flexibility with a second path. And now I want to talk about a change that kind of straddles the procedures and standards. This is one where we have learned from the implementation of the 2018 code changes. At that time, with accessory dwelling units being allowed everywhere, the code team arrived at a recommendation to do away with duplexes and triplexes as a housing type and fold those into the accessory dwelling unit housing type. The intent with this policy change was to make the code more equitable and straightforward. What we found from the implementation of this is that it created confusion for developers and sometimes for their lenders. In addition, with the change in state rules that began to address duplexes and triplexes as a separate housing type, the current approach became even more difficult to maintain and reconcile with those changes in state law. So the code changes we are drafting will once again separate accessory dwelling units as their own housing type, but will collapse the duplex and triplex housing types into one housing type, small form residential. The reason for this approach is that these are treated the same or essentially the same under the state's administrative rules. This is also in alignment with our current approach, but it creates a clearer pathway for developers. So the last change to procedures is related to those middle housing land divisions required under Senate Bill 458. Under the state law, the city must apply an expedited process to these divisions. We are required to allow these divisions after construction, but we may offer them at the time of permit application. Our proposed approach will in many ways mimic the way that condominium plats are handled at the state level. So if you're familiar with that, they're typically done after development is complete. And with that approach, we are looking at treating the lot, the parent lot, separately as the legal lot for meeting development code requirements. But the resultant lots from a middle housing land division, which we're calling a sublot plat, would be sublots. Those are only separable for property transfer purposes. They retain the housing type designations that were applied at the time of development. So in other words, if you have a cottage cluster development that goes through a middle housing land division, the cottages themselves still remain cottages. The original lot would be used for land use compliance. They would have to provide individual utilities, one dwelling unit per lot, and then the sublot lines would follow the largely follow the building footprint. And then all of the other common areas would be placed in tracts under common ownership. So the last piece that we are proposing is the reduction in the number of residential zones. As I mentioned at the outset, the city has a relatively high number of residential zones, currently at 8. With Tigard's changes in housing policy and more so the changes in state law, the distinctions between those zones have largely disappeared in some areas. So we propose to simplify our zoning and merge some of the smallest zones into zones with similar development standards for small form residential development. Those small form residential development standards will be the only ones that apply different density standards from zone to zone. So this table shows the proposal for zone merges. As you can see, the R1 and R2 zones represent a very small portion of the residential zone. So with this, we would be merging R1 into R2. So those 32 acres would become part of the 55 acres under R2, for a total of 87. The R3.5 would be merged into the R4.5, which is much larger in acreage. And then the R40 zone, which we actually only have one property that's zoned R40, would be brought into the R25, and we would have one high density zone for apartment development. This is just a table that shows what the development standards for single detached houses look like in those zones currently, just to kind of get a sense of how similar they already are. And again, the distinction between these zones is really only for single detached houses. For middle housing, we have to apply the same standards from zone to zone, regardless of the designation. So the adoption timetable for this, Planning Commission has been briefed. We would be looking to bring the changes to them in late April and bringing their recommendation to City Council in late May with an effective date of June 23rd to meet the acknowledgement date from DLCD. We originally thought we might have an extra month because the state law says that it has to be in place by June 30th, but DLCD has recently interpreted that to mean that that means acknowledgement from DLCD and effective date, not just adoption date. So with that, I will take any questions or comments on this.
It's a lot to take in that period of time. I will say that.
I apologize for the pace at which I went through a lot there.
Councilor Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Warren, thank you for that excellent presentation. I read the materials, but I understood it a lot better when you did the presentation. And I remember writing on all those original zones on the original zoning map with a pen. So yeah, there's a lot of them. Anyway, the thing that I just wanted to clarify, type 2 is an administrative, right? It's a staff approval, doesn't go to a hearing, right? Isn't that a type 2?
Correct. It's a ministerial review.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Warren, I'll ask a question or make a comment if others aren't going to, and that's just that from multiple middle housing folks, I've heard a lot of desire to have some units allowed to have garages that are attached, maybe not to all units, but I guess I want to ask the question about perhaps what the rationale is, why that's not being proposed. There's, groups of individuals that may be very ripe to live in middle housing or in a cottage cluster, but want the safety. Think about an elderly woman living on her own, wanting the protection of being able to pull into their garage and close it. Can you comment on that at all?
Yes, it's an excellent question, and we've definitely had a very robust conversation about garages in particular with middle housing. So there's 3 things that come into play here, and they are all trade-offs, right? There's no right or wrong answer. But the first is that a garage square footage, because these are smaller housing units. And the reason they are smaller by code is to encourage affordability and accessibility for those folks who can't afford a larger home. And garage does add square footage, it adds cost. The second part of that is that a garage also offsets living space. So when you've already got a small unit, and one of the things that we've gotten back from the development community is that 1,200 square feet is about that right spot, that sweet spot for a 3-bedroom unit. Kind of hard to get 3 bedrooms and anything below that. But garage space in a unit that size is obviously going to offset some kind of living space, whether it's a bedroom or something else. So it's a trade-off on that end as well. And then, the other thing is that with middle housing, particularly with the cottage clusters, and we do allow the attached garages with some of the housing types, but with a cottage cluster, the way that these, or a courtyard unit, the way that these are laid out, it's intended to group the parking in a way that, again, this gets to the trade-off. The parking is grouped in a way that creates a more accessible space for everyone. It consolidates the paving areas, it consolidates those vehicle maneuvering areas, it consolidates the parking areas, and it creates more green space, more space for activity. And the other thing is that it prevents the breakup of the shared space for vehicle maneuvering areas. So if you imagine a group of 8 houses where everyone has an individual driveway coming in to a garage, each of those crossings where a vehicle is crossing into that dedicated area, that's a space that suddenly is not as easily traversed for the other residents of that development. So, but I recognize, certainly the points that you brought up are very valid. And that's one of the things that we've looked at in the type 2 discretionary pathway is, is there a possibility to kind of open it up in there through adjustments or even through the code itself? Because we do recognize there is a trade-off there.
I mean, it could be as little as 10 or 20% of the units or something like that. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we have a whole bunch of cottages with big garages. That's not my suggestion. It's just that, different groups of people have different needs. So, all right, other members of the council with questions, comments, or feedback? Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, just anecdotally, having seen quite a few of the cluster developments that do not have garages, they certainly do extend walkability and the green space, and that seems to be a nice trade-off for those who have smaller homes. And so just anecdotally, just would want to mention that that's been something that seems to have been well received.
Other comments or feedback? Mr. Warren, the request tonight this is really a briefing. Is there a request for any particular input? I know I've already given some without being asked, but
certainly always welcome feedback on these briefings when these are legislative projects, of course. And I think, much of what we're proposing, again, is just bringing the city into compliance with state law. And then there is the element of improving the code a little bit here and there, some tweaks where, again, we've learned the real policy change here are those zone merges. Again, we don't think that that's a huge impact, but certainly welcome any council feedback on that as we bring that forward.
Skylar, can you put that back on the screen for a minute and I may have missed the impact of it. Can you do a quick 30-second redo of that or lesson about why we should pay attention to that and what it exactly means?
So we have 8 zones. Our 2 lowest density zones, and I use the word density loosely here because density is sort of out the window. in reality and in practice with housing. So, these represent an incredibly small amount of, land area in the city, and they're fairly indistinct. The state requires us to allow townhouses, row houses, for example, in both of these zones at the same density and lot size that we would in the R25 zone. So the real difference in these zones comes down to just the difference in the single detached house standards. So from an administrative standpoint, managing these different zones and just simplifying our residential zones, it makes sense, whether it's in this project or a future project. Certainly welcome feedback on that as well. But for 32 acres, managing an entire zone for those 32 acres doesn't make sense. Same thing with R3.5. Relatively very small considering the amount of acreage that's in R4.5. So to simplify things for city teammates and also for the development community, consolidating those two zones into one zone just makes it that much easier to manage our code. And then, like I said, with R40, we only have one property zoned R40. So if nothing else, that one certainly probably needs to go. It's fully developed as well at this point.
Thank you. Sorry to make you redo that. Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay. We'll move on. Councilor Goodhouse had the non-agenda item that I asked the city manager to cover in his administrative report. Councilor Goodhouse, is that acceptable to you? Okay, City Manager Reimer, administrative report.
Absolutely. Well, good evening again, Mayor and councilors, my teammates and community. Just a quick follow-up to Councilor Goodhouse's question. Today, Councilor Shaw also posed a very similar question to our Economic Development Manager, Lloyd Purdy. And so I will send that information to all of you as well, so you can see the response. Basically, Lloyd is finalizing our contract with MISO right now, focusing on the grant program and the criteria. As part of this, we also have information, basic information, if you will, that the program has been approved by the council at $500,000 on our Engage Tigard page. So it is there. Soon, Lloyd will then be sending an email out to our local businesses about the program availability once we finalize the contract with MISO. We'll also be updating the website at that point. And then over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll be going through the application process, which will probably start in roughly 2 to 2.5 weeks with a review, and then hopefully starting to award some of the grants, which will be our first round. It's important to know for the council that we'll have more of an open window timeframe rather than first come, first serve, so they can get in and be compared against the criteria, since there is a limited dollar amount in the grant program. And then we'll move on to the loan program as well with that. So like I said, I can send more information, but look in the next couple of weeks for the formal rollout of the program. Does that help, Councilor Goodhouse?
I was about to raise my hand, but then you asked me a question, so then I did a clap, I think. Did you say that there was a spot on the website that's live right now as far as people can see that there's information, or that's going to be soon?
Yeah, it's on the Engage Tigard.
Okay, and that'll be part of the link. I was figuring if we can at least get that out there, that to the community, that's been approved by council, and that people can at least be expecting to apply for that, and that's something we could share. I think if we start promoting that, at least they'll know that we've approved it. And I'm curious, I know that the other rounds that we've done seem to be quicker. Is there a reason why this one's taken longer?
We're working through the contracting process with MISO, so it's a key part of this, obviously, to make sure that our partner agency is ready. I know our team understands the sense of urgency, especially if the response to the grant program, is high, and so we're trying to get it out as quick as we can.
Okay, but that'd be great, if we could promote that. At least businesses know that there's something out there, and they can start thinking about it and gathering information or be prepared for it.
Okay, I'll
Thank you.
Mr. Purdy know, and I think he's already contemplating that. Like I said, I'll also forward that email so you can just see a little more of the detail behind that. Just two other quick things. Speaking of downtown, speaking of our businesses, we'll be having our third downtown parking committee meeting this week. And so, as you know, it's a group of local businesses, our teammates and others that are participating in that. So more to come. And then just one last thing, because we've been talking about our Tigard teen reading during February. And I gave you some astonishing numbers last month, but wait to hear these numbers. So we had 33 teens participating in February. They read 26,886 pages. Our team over at the library, so that's equivalent to reading Moby Dick over 44 times. And so a great competition by all, and just want to say kudos to our library team as well as to our teens that participated in that fun reading event. And that concludes my very brief report tonight.
Thank you, City Manager Reimer. Any questions or follow-up? All right. Tigard City Council will go into executive session to discuss exempt public records.
There's a hand up. Sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, I'll take it offline, but I'll take it offline with City Manager Reimer. You go ahead.
Shaw, if it's public, I don't mind if we want to. If you want to ask, I had waited and thought I did enough waiting, but I did not. So
that the button, I think it's a technology. It's just slow tonight. Yeah, I saw the advanced Tigard training grant applications. The reason I'm concerned is I've had a couple of businesses reach out asking about the program. I couldn't find it. When I go to engage Tigard, it just talks about advanced Tigard, about the workforce development. But again, I can take that offline with City Manager Reimer and Economic Development Manager Purdy. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. The Tigard City Council will go into executive session to discuss exempt public records under ORS 192.660 subsection 2F. No executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decisions. The council will adjourn after the executive session. Good night, Tigard.